I missed every important moment of my daughter's life. Now, she won't answer my calls. I spent 30 years building a legacy to give my daughter the world, only to realize that in the process, I had built a wall that kept me out of it. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Thomas, and I am 56 years old. The silence in this house is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of a museum where all the exhibits have been removed, leaving only empty plaques and dust. I sit in my home office, a room that was once the command center of my life, surrounded by leather-bound books and accolades that gleam under the soft lighting of recessed halogens. For decades, this room felt like a cockpit, a place from which I navigated the turbulent skies of high-stakes corporate law. I used to believe that the hum of the computer server and the distant ring of a telephone were the sounds of progress. Now, they sound like the ticking of a clock I can no longer turn back. The mahogany desk before me is expansive, large enough to spread out the depositions of a billion-dollar merger. Yet it feels barren because it lacks the one thing that truly matters. A drawing from a child who grew up thinking her father's job was more important than her existence. I remember the early years with a clarity that is painful, a sharp contrast to the blur of the last 2 decades. When my daughter, Lily, was born, I was an associate at a firm that ate young lawyers for breakfast. I remember the smell of the hospital corridor, a mix of antiseptic and coffee, and the overwhelming weight of responsibility that settled on my shoulders the moment I held her. She was so small, fragile in a way that terrified a man used to handling rigid contracts and unyielding opponents. In that moment, I made a silent vow. I looked at her wrinkled face and promised myself that she would never want for anything. I would ensure she had the best schools, the safest neighborhoods, and the most expensive clothes. I confused the act of provision with the act of parenting. I thought that love was a transfer of resources, that if I built a fortress of finance around her, she would feel safe. I did not understand that what she actually needed was not a fortress, but a presence. The first fracture in our relationship appeared so subtly that I didn't even hear it crack. Lily was 3 years old. It was a Tuesday, or perhaps a Wednesday. The days always bled together in a haze of billable hours. I had promised to take her to the park. She had a new red wagon, a plastic contraption that she dragged around the living room for days, chanting "Park, Daddy, Park" with a rhythm that burrowed into my subconscious. I had looked at her, smiling, and said the words that would eventually become my epitaph. I promise, baby. Nothing will stop me. But something did stop me. It was a client, a telecommunications giant facing a lawsuit that threatened to dismantle their European holdings. They needed a memo by 5 in the morning. It was an emergency, or at least my boss told me it was. I remember the sun beginning to dip below the skyline, casting long, amber shadows across the city, while I stared at a glowing monitor, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I remember glancing at the clock, seeing it tick past 6, then 7. The guilt was a dull ache in my stomach, easily ignored with the justification that I was doing this for her. I was missing the park so that one day she could own the park. When I finally walked through the front door at nearly midnight, the house was dark. The red wagon was sitting in the hallway, abandoned. I walked into her room, guided only by the light of the moon streaming through the blinds. She was asleep, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her cheeks stained with dried tears. My wife was sitting in the rocking chair in the corner, looking at me with an expression that wasn't quite anger, but something far worse, disappointment. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The silence in that room was louder than any courtroom objection I had ever faced. I leaned down to kiss Lily's forehead, and in her sleep, she turned away from me, burrowing deeper into the pillow. I told myself it was just one day. I told myself there would be thousands of other days. I didn't know then that I was teaching her the first and most enduring lesson of her life. When it came to a choice between her and my work, the work would always win. The pattern that began in those early years solidified into a routine of absence that I wore like a comfortable suit. As Lily grew from a toddler into a child, her world expanded to include school, friends, and hobbies, while my world seemed to shrink, focusing entirely on the microscopic details of corporate litigation. I became a phantom in my own home, a figure who appeared late at night and vanished before the sun rose, leaving behind a trail of gifts and cash to cover my tracks. I operated under the delusion that quantity could substitute for quality, that a diamond necklace could heal the wound of a missed dinner, or that a trip to Disney World, orchestrated by my assistant and chaperoned by her mother, could make up for the fact that I had missed her elementary school graduation. I remember the day of the school play clearly. It was the 4th grade, and Lily had been cast as a sunflower. It was a non-speaking role, requiring her to stand on stage in a yellow costume with felt petals, holding her arms out to the sky. She had been so excited about the yellow felt, spending hours at the kitchen table cutting out the leaves with my wife. For weeks, she had practiced her sunflower dance, a slow, swaying motion that was supposed to mimic the breeze. I had marked the date on my calendar in bold red ink. I had even set an alarm on my phone. I was determined to be there. I needed to be there to prove to myself, if not to them, that I was still a father. But the legal world is rarely respectful of personal calendars. On the morning of the play, a merger I had been working on for 6 months hit a catastrophic snag. A competitor had launched a hostile takeover bid, and my team was required to be in the war room immediately. I sat in that glass-walled conference room, watching the hours tick by, my phone vibrating periodically with reminders of the play. At 3 o'clock, the time the curtain was supposed to rise, I was deep in a deposition, arguing over the semantics of a non-compete clause. I looked at the silent phone on the table, the screen lighting up with a photo of Lily in her costume, a photo my wife had sent earlier in the week. I felt a tug at my heart, a physical sensation of being torn in two, but I silenced the phone and turned back to the documents. I didn't make it to the play. I didn't even make it home for dinner. When I finally stumbled in, exhausted and smelling of stale coffee, close to midnight, the house was quiet again. On the kitchen counter, there was a program from the play folded neatly next to a plate of cold, uneaten celebration cake. I picked up the program. On the back, in the corner, my wife had written a note. She looked for you. She kept looking at the empty seat in the 3rd row until the lights went down. I stared at those words, reading them over and over again until they blurred. I went to the refrigerator and took a slice of the cake, eating it standing up in the dark kitchen. It tasted like sawdust and regret. The next morning, I tried to talk to Lily about it. I knelt down, trying to catch her eye as she tied her shoes, ready for school. I told her I was sorry. I told her work had been an emergency. I offered to take her to the amusement park that weekend, just the 2 of us. No phone, no laptop. She looked up at me, her eyes void of the sparkle they used to have. She shrugged her shoulders, a small, dismissive gesture that cut deeper than any scream. "It's okay, Dad," she said, her voice flat. "I'm used to it." That phrase, "I'm used to it," was the sound of a door closing. It was the moment she stopped expecting me to show up. She had adapted to my absence by building a life that didn't require my presence. I watched her walk out the door to the bus stop, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, and I realized that I had paid for her school shoes and her clothes and her lunchbox, but I had lost the right to walk her to the bus. As Lily transitioned into her teenage years, the distance between us transformed from a gap into a chasm. Adolescence is a difficult time for any father and daughter, navigating the stormy waters of independence and identity, but for us, the storms were silent. We were 2 people living in the same house, occupying different orbits. My career had reached a zenith. I was a named partner now, my name etched in gold on the lobby door. The demands on my time were absolute, but I used them as a shield. I told myself that the friction between us was just normal teenage angst, that she needed space, and that my busy schedule conveniently provided it. I missed the subtle changes in her. I missed the moments where she went from being a girl who needed help with her homework to a young woman who locked her door to listen to music I didn't understand. I saw the reports cards, all A's of course, but I didn't see the late nights she spent studying alone because I was always in my office. I knew she had joined the soccer team because I wrote the checks for the uniforms and the travel fees, but I never saw her play. I saw the trophies lined up on her shelf, gathering dust, but I didn't see the bruised knees or the joy of victory or the tears of defeat. There was one specific incident during her sophomore year of high school that encapsulates this era perfectly. It was the regional championship game. Lily was the co-captain of the team, a position she had earned through relentless practice and grit. My wife had told me about it weeks in advance. It was the biggest game of the year. The team had a chance to go to state. I had every intention of going. I even left the office early that day, at 4 o'clock, feeling a sense of triumph. I was beating the system. I was going to be a dad. But as I drove toward the school, my phone rang. It was the senior partner. A crisis had erupted with our biggest client. A document had been leaked, a scandal was brewing, and they needed a statement immediately. I pulled over to the side of the road, my foot hovering over the brake. I could see the exit for the school up ahead. I could see the floodlights of the stadium in the distance, casting a glow against the darkening sky. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, the engine idling, my hand gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. In one hand, I held the potential to secure my legacy as a titan of industry. In the other, the potential to be a father to a girl who was rapidly becoming a stranger. I made the turn, not toward the school, but toward the office. I justified it by telling myself that her mother would be there. I told myself that she would understand, that she knew how important my job was. I went to the office, drafted the statement, saved the client, and secured my bonus. It was a masterclass in professional crisis management. When I got home that night, long past midnight, the house was dark. The next morning, at breakfast, the air was thick with tension. Lily sat across from me, picking at her toast. I asked who won the game. She didn't look up. She didn't say a word. She just stood up, took her plate to the sink, and walked out of the room. My wife looked at me with eyes that had grown cold over the years. They lost in overtime, she said quietly. Lily missed the final penalty kick. She was crying in the car for an hour. She waited for you, Thomas. She waited by the locker room door until the janitor turned off the lights. I felt a hollowness open up inside me, a void that no amount of money or success could fill. I had missed the victory, but worse, I had missed the defeat. I had missed the chance to hold her when she was hurting, to tell her that one missed shot didn't define her. I had chosen a corporate statement over my daughter's heartbreak. A few days later, a package arrived from the school. It was a team photo signed by all the girls. Lily was in the front row, holding a ball, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I put the photo on my desk, right next to my Lawyer of the Year award. It seemed fitting. They were both hollow achievements. The years seemed to accelerate after high school, a blur of milestones that passed by me like scenery from a train window. Lily went away to college. I paid for the tuition in full, of course, ensuring she could attend the most prestigious university in the state. I saw her off on move-in day. It was a chaotic scene of boxes and crying parents and excited freshmen. I stood on the curb, checking my watch, worried about making it back for a conference call. I hugged her quickly, told her to call if she needed money, and watched her walk away into a crowd of strangers. She didn't look back. I told myself it was because she was independent, strong. I refused to see it for what it was. She was walking away because she knew I was already gone in spirit. College became a 4-year exercise in vague updates and surface-level conversations. I knew her major, economics, naturally, but I didn't know her friends. I knew her GPA, but I didn't know her dreams. She came home for holidays, but the visits were short and awkward. She spent most of her time in her room or with her mother. We exchanged pleasantries over turkey and ham, skirting around the vast emptiness between us. I filled the silence with questions about her classes, her future career path, trying to mold her into a version of myself, unaware that she was desperately trying to be anything but. Then came the day that should have been the highlight of my life as a father. Lily got engaged. A young man named Daniel, thankfully a good man from what I could tell, had asked her to marry him. I met him at a dinner shortly after the proposal. He was polite, nervous, clearly intelligent. I grilled him over the appetizers, asking about his job prospects and his 5-year plan, treating the union like a merger acquisition rather than a celebration of love. Lily watched me, her jaw set, her eyes flashing with that familiar look of disappointment. Later that night, she told me I had made him uncomfortable. I laughed it off, telling her I was just looking out for her interests. The wedding planning commenced. My wife handled the details, while I handled the checkbook. I wrote a check for the venue, a sprawling estate with gardens that cost more than my first house. I wrote a check for the dress, the catering, the band. I felt a sense of satisfaction, a feeling that I was doing my part. I was providing the fairy tale. But as the wedding approached, the friction intensified. There was the rehearsal dinner. I was stuck in Chicago in a deposition that ran late. I chartered a private jet to get back, a frantic effort to prove I could make it. I landed, rushed to the venue, and walked in just as the speeches were ending. I was breathless, disheveled, my tie loosened. I walked up to the head table, expecting a hug, a thank you for making the effort. Lily looked at me, then looked away, continuing her conversation with her maid of honor. The hurt was sharp, but I swallowed it, blaming my lateness. The day of the wedding was perfect. The weather was sunny, the flowers were in bloom, and the champagne flowed. I walked her down the aisle. It was the longest walk of my life. Her arm was linked in mine, stiff and unyielding. As we walked toward the altar, I leaned in to whisper a joke, something to break the tension. She didn't smile. She kept her eyes fixed forward. At the end of the aisle, I lifted her veil. I looked into her eyes, searching for a trace of the little girl who used to chase me around the living room. I saw only a young woman fulfilling an obligation. When the officiant asked who gave this woman away, I said I do, with a voice that cracked, finally understanding the true weight of the phrase. I wasn't giving her away. I had never truly held her. I was merely acknowledging the transfer of a relationship I had never built. The reception was a blur of toasts and dancing. I gave a speech, carefully curated by my assistant, about hard work and success and building a future. It was eloquent and polished, and it fell completely flat. It was a speech for a boardroom, not a wedding. Later in the evening, the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. The opening notes of a familiar waltz began to play. I walked to the center of the floor, extending my hand to my daughter. She hesitated for a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity, before taking it. We moved around the floor in a stiff embrace. I looked down at her, wanting to say something, wanting to apologize for the missed games, the late nights, the emptiness. But the words died in my throat. There were too many of them, and they were too late. When the song ended, she pulled away immediately, offering a polite, frozen smile, and went to find her new husband. I stood alone on the dance floor, surrounded by hundreds of happy people, feeling more isolated than I ever had in my office. The years following the wedding were characterized by a slow, quiet drift. Lily and Daniel moved to the West Coast. I sent them housewarming gifts, expensive furniture, artwork that I thought suited their style. They sent thank you notes, brief and typed. I became a grandfather. I received the news via email from my wife. A photo attachment showed a tiny, wrinkled face swaddled in a blanket. I felt a surge of emotion, a desperate urge to fly out there immediately, to start over, to be the grandfather I never was as a father. I booked a flight for the weekend. But then, the inevitable happened. A client crisis, a looming deadline. I rescheduled the flight. Then I rescheduled again. I told myself the baby was too small to know the difference anyway. I told myself I would visit when he was older, when he could actually interact with people. It was the same lie I had told myself with Lily, repackaged for a new generation. A month turned into 6 months. 6 months turned into a year. Finally, I made the trip. I flew into San Francisco, rented a luxury car, and drove to their suburban home. It was a nice house, smaller than mine, but charming. When I rang the doorbell, Lily answered. She looked surprised to see me. I hadn't called ahead. I wanted it to be a surprise. I held out a massive, wrapped box containing a plush, motorized pony that cost a fortune. She looked at the box, then at me. "Dad," she said, "you didn't tell us you were coming." "I wanted to surprise my grandson," I said, beaming, stepping inside. The house was warm, chaotic in a way that felt alien to me. There were toys scattered on the floor, a few cheap plastic ones. Nothing like the motorized pony I held. Lily took me to the living room, where Daniel was sitting on the carpet, playing blocks with a toddler. This was my grandson. He looked up at me, a stranger in a suit. He didn't smile. He hid his face in his father's shoulder. I felt a sting of rejection. I sat down, trying to engage, pulling out the expensive toy. I pressed a button, and it neighed loudly, moving its head. The toddler looked terrified and started crying. I spent 3 days there. It was an excruciating exercise in awkwardness. I didn't know their routine. I didn't know what the boy ate or when he napped. I was a guest in their lives, a wealthy benefactor who happened to share DNA. I tried to take them out to a fancy dinner to celebrate, but they looked uncomfortable, worrying about the toddler's behavior in a high-end restaurant. The entire visit felt like a transaction. I was trying to buy intimacy with dinners and gifts, but the currency had no value there. On the last day, as I was packing my bag, Lily came into the guest room. She leaned against the doorframe, watching me. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't know who you were." When he saw the photo in the hall, he pointed and asked, "Who's the man?" I froze, my hand hovering over my suitcase. "He'll learn," I said, my voice weak. "He will," she agreed. "But he won't learn from you. You're shadow dad. You fly in, you buy things, and you leave. That's not a grandfather. That's a vending machine." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't anger anymore. It was just a sad acceptance of reality. She had stopped fighting for my attention a long time ago, and now she didn't even expect me to fight for hers. I drove to the airport in silence. The motorized pony left abandoned in the corner of their living room, a testament to my ignorance. Now, I sit in this silent house, the journey behind me and the reality before me. I retired last month. There was no farewell party that really mattered to me, just a polite handshake and a gold watch that sits in a drawer. I have all the time in the world now. The schedule that ruled my life is blank. I wake up in the morning and stare at the ceiling, waiting for the phone to ring, for the urgency of a crisis to give me purpose. But the phone stays silent. I pick up the receiver sometimes and dial the number on the West Coast. I let it ring. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Sometimes it goes to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Lily and Daniel. Leave a message." I hang up. What is there to say? I'm sorry. Sorry is too small a word for 30 years of neglect. Sorry doesn't mend the fabric of a life that wasn't woven together. Sometimes she does answer. The conversations are stilted, polite. "How are you, Dad?" "Fine, fine. Just checking in." "That's nice. We have to go. Soccer practice." Click. I look around my office. The plaques on the wall tarnish slightly in the changing light. The degrees from prestigious universities represent years of study, but they didn't teach me the one subject that mattered: connection. I realize now that I didn't miss moments. I missed the cumulative effect of moments. It wasn't just the missed school play or the late night at the office. It was the missed conversations at the dinner table, the missed drives to school, the missed opportunity to sit on the floor and build a tower of blocks just to knock it down again. I thought success was a destination you reached so you could finally relax and enjoy life. I didn't realize that success is the journey itself, made up of the small, mundane interactions that build trust and love. I was so busy building a platform for her to stand on that I forgot to build a bridge to her. Last week, I received an invitation in the mail. It was for my grandson's 5th birthday party. A casual backyard affair, the invitation said. It requested no gifts, just presents. I stared at the word for a long time. I booked a ticket immediately. This time, there will be no crisis. There will be no rescheduling. I will get on that plane. I will go to that backyard. I will sit on a plastic chair and eat cheap pizza and watch him blow out his candles. I don't know if he will know who I am. I don't know if Lily will ever truly forgive me. I don't know if I can bridge the chasm I spent a lifetime digging. But I have to try, because the silence in this house is deafening, and the only thing louder is the sound of time running out. I am 56 years old. I have millions of dollars in the bank and a reputation that precedes me in every boardroom in the country. But as I look at the framed photo of my daughter on my desk, the one from the day she was born before I taught her that work came first, I would trade every single dollar, every accolade, every victory just for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to go back to that hallway, to see the red wagon, to make the choice to turn around, walk out the door, and take her to the park. I would give everything just to be the father she needed, the one who was there. But time is a river that only flows one way, and I am left standing on the bank, watching my life float away, hoping that somehow, in the twilight of my years, I can learn how to swim